Well, this is the last official episode of the news for this year, and it was really important to me to make sure that we covered a topic or touched once again on a topic that is particularly close to my heart. I first began talking about water and water supply issues in the southeast of Australia way back in 2009. Yes, coming on 15 years ago, and it was in fact the very first issue that I tackled and the one that kind of made me who I am today, all these years later. But unfortunately, despite 15 years of coverage of this issue, things have only gotten worse and not better. I'm talking, of course, about the recent decision by the federal government to continue with water buybacks in the Murray Darling Basin, another 450 gigalitres, which if you're from the city and you don't know what a gigalitre is, it's just a crap load of water. And 450 gigalitres out of a system that is already strained from farmers and irrigators that have already had an enormous amount of water taken off them is just absolute madness, in my opinion, and I'm not alone. I'm joined by John Lolicato. Now, John, you are an irrigator. You're in the New South Wales region. How is this announcement? It's not a recent announcement anymore. It was a month or so ago. But what's the mood? What's the vibe in your irrigation communities around this?
Oh, it's actually devastating. With that announcement the other day, we've communities, irrigation communities, townspeople, the whole lot. For 12 years, we've actually bent over backwards to work with government since the implementation of the Basin Plan, which started in 2012. They've asked us to attend meetings, they've asked us to do submissions, they've asked us to do all sorts of stuff, and it's all been on deaf ears, completely on deaf ears. We actually thought we were gaining a little bit of ground at one stage, but with Plibersek's announcement just recently about restoring rivers, even the actual wording of restoring rivers is wrong, because I'm quite proud of our rivers. I think our rivers are actually in pretty good shape after 200 years of white settlement. We've planned for the future. Our forefathers did an exceptionally good job. We live in the driest inhabited continent in the world. We needed to take some of the variability out of the system. So our forefathers built the Snowy Mountain scheme, dams up in the hills. Okay, there were some consequences, but at the same time, our whole system has actually revolved around it. Plus, we've allowed, communities to develop inland, which was the problem originally. Everyone wanted to settle along the coast. With the development of inland, put water in a dry, arid climate, and you'll get people that will follow. They'll grow food and they'll grow fibre, and that's what we have been doing. We've been trying to get this government to realise that you can't just keep on, milking a stone, because it's we've already given up. There's over 4,000 GL, 400,000 megs of water that has already been taken out of productive communities and been put into an environmental bucket. And, they keep talking about 2,100 GL and all the rest of it. If you look up the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holders, the amount of environmental water that is actually owned by the environment, not just the Commonwealth, but also the state, there's over 4,000 GL, which is Dartmouth Dam is 4,000 GL, or 4 million megs.
There's a lot of people who'd be watching there from the city, or even if they're from the country, they're not irrigators. They wouldn't really necessarily understand what it is that we're discussing here. It's worth talking a little bit about what the river was before the dams and the weirs and the regulation was put in. It's a historical fact, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Murray River used to actually run completely dry, and we have photographs from the early 1900s of exactly that happening. So let's talk for a minute, if you would, about the environmental benefits that have actually come as a result of things like dams and weirs and even the irrigation.
Well, as I said before, the Australia is well renowned as the driest inhabited continent of the world. Now, when you're that dry, you've got river systems that like flooding, rains, and drought. It's just part of a sequence. So that's why it was so important to actually try to take some of the variability out of the river systems that we've got, and that's where building the dams was so important. And also, when they were first, Australia's a huge continent. Everyone wants to live on the coast. How do you encourage people inland? You encourage people inland by creating opportunities, and that's what our forefathers did by building the dams. That's allowed us to actually, we've got river communities all the way up and down the river. Previously, the Murray River, without the dams, the Murray River would have run dry at least 8 to 9 times, completely dry. So the towns like Adelaide, that isn't even in the basin, by the way, towns like Adelaide, Albury, all of the towns along the river they would have completely run out of water. Ever since the dams have been built, 1936 for Hume Dam, the river has never run dry since.
Yeah.
And that's something that everyone tends to forget about. And what it's done, it's created a huge opportunity for Australia to actually be the food bowl of the food bowl of Australia. But we actually, most of our produce is exported, which we carry a huge burden for Australia.
So we'll get to the produce that's produced in a moment. I want to stick with the environmental aspects of this, something that I hadn't really considered until I began to actually cover this topic and really research it and get out onto farms and see it for myself. I've got a photograph here of yourself. This is you looking spiffy, looking fine there on a beautiful sunny day. You've got a couple of working dogs with you, and behind you is actually a rice crop. Now, I don't have audio for this, but I can tell you what it sounded like because I've been to these sorts of places before, and certainly by nightfall, you would have heard nothing but the deafening roar of cicadas, frogs croaking relentlessly. I'll warrant there were some fish in the channels that fed that particular crop, and by day you would have had migrating birds wandering through the water, picking out bugs and various things. Am I wrong?
Look, you've hit it right on the head there. With that's a rice crop that you're seeing in the background, and the thing with rice, okay, a lot of people say that we shouldn't be growing it in Australia. Rice is probably the most suited crop to be growing in an arid climate like ours, because the simple fact is, if we have a drought here, or if there's very limited water in the dams, we don't grow it. We just sit back and we have to buy our time. But if there's plenty of water in the dams, we grow rice. And when we do grow rice, we're the most efficient rice growers in the world. We create a whole that crop itself, as you said, the southern bullfrog, which is an endangered species, the bittern, there's numerous amount of endangered species that actually breed on our farms now, because we actually are growing. It's like a wetland. You can see the trees in the background.
Yeah.
Most Aussie farmers are pretty good at that we live in this environment, so we appreciate it. So we don't go and clear fell the whole thing. We work with it. We've created a whole new lot of biodiversity that actually revolves around our irrigation practices. And now that we're actually dewatering these places, that whole biodiversity is just collapsing.
Yeah.
Because we keep our creeks and gullies and other things going, and quite a number of us actually also have our own private wetlands that we actually do use specifically as that, forgetting even about the rice crops. But the rice crops are something that, when there's plenty of water around, we grow it. It provides an enormous amount of revenue for the Australian GDP, and at the end of it, we actually have people living on the inland, which is important to actually move them away from the coast.
And as you say, if it was an orchard of some sort, other types of crops that are permanent plantings, they have to put water on it every year, even in a drought. But being an annual crop like this, you can make that decision based on how much water is available. Now, there has been some coverage recently, and I applaud the ABC Rural for this, and this is, I believe, Cara Jeffrey's article here talking about the impact on these particular farmers, but this is really replicated for yourself and for so many people, sitting there saying, well, is it really worth it? And sitting there saying, well, you've busted your guts for how many decades doing this, and I'm sure by now, John, you must be feeling incredibly unappreciated and incredibly, I wouldn't blame you for being a little bit bitter towards city people like myself for being so taken for granted. What can be done to improve this situation? We have a Murray Darling Basin plan that, in my opinion, has been a disaster since the start. We have a federal government that is determined to ram through all the last of it, all the last 450 gigalitres of water, buybacks, etc. There's been an enormous amount of damage already. There is more damage coming thanks to this decision by Tanya Plibersek. What can be done about this? How can we help?
Look, the bottom line is this is the final kick in the guts for most of us, because as you can see, I'm an old fart, and there's quite a few of us that have, battled on, and we have actually got a fair few younger people that started coming back onto farms. But the only way they're going to survive is with access to water, so that we can actually have our irrigated crops. Like we've just finished harvesting some of our cereals. We had like our dryland crops. It was actually quite a good year. We harvested sort of 3 and 4 ton dryland crops, but our irrigated crops, we were harvesting 8 and 9 ton cereal crops, and that's because of irrigation. Now, if we haven't got that, that's what makes the wheels turn. So to give our next generation an opportunity to be able to keep farming, they need access to water. And people like myself that are, I've been around for a fair while. I do own water entitlements. And what Plibersec's doing, she's targeting the older generation. She's targeting the water traders, the water punters, to actually buy water off them. Now, that's all good and well for the individual. For me, it'd be terrific. If all I cared about was myself and my wife, we could sell our water, make a lot of good money out of it, and we could head off into the sunset. But the problem is, the water that I've got here belongs to this community. It belongs to the area where it comes from, because the infrastructure's there. The towns that are around our area, me spending money in town, whether it's fertiliser, fuel, going to the grocery store, all of those things revolve around us spending $1. And if I sell my water, every megalitre that I sell takes away from the productive pool. And the only place these younger blokes can buy that, not only younger blokes, but new people that have come into the area, the only place they can get that water from is out of the productive pool. And as Tanya Plibersek and previous governments keep on reducing that productive pool smaller and smaller, it pushes the price up. There's a Victorian report that was done last year that proved that as that water, the productive pool reduces, it pushes the price of water up higher and higher. To unsustainable levels. And you touched on it before that, we've got crops downstream that they're at annual crops. They need water every year. That is not suitable for the Australian climate. The Australian climate needs annuals like rice, because we can go, 1 year not grow rice, next 2 years we grow it. But if you go and put an almond plantation in, you need to water that crop every year. And government policy has not taken that into consideration. The amount of development that has taken hold in the last probably 4 to 5 years downstream of what we call the Barmer Choke or downstream of Swan Hill physically cannot get the volumes of water there that's required. And now Tanya Plibersek with her 450, the extra water she's trying to get out of production and the extra water that she says is for to return to the rivers. The river can't sustain the volumes of water that are already going down it. That's why we see the banks of the rivers eroding, trees collapsing into the river. It is not a Nile or a Ganges. The Murray River is at relatively a small channel in comparison to world's rivers around the world. You start trying to pump too much water down there, and you'll see exactly what's happening at the moment. Those rivers are collapsing with the erosion on the banks, the loss of trees right through the forest, right through to the other side of Swan Hill. And all for what? So we can push more water out to sea?
Well, again,
it just doesn't make sense.
Just to paint the picture for people who are city-based, the Murray River, it is a very small channel, John, as you've said, but in a boom and bust environment where the boom means a flood that goes over the top and the channel's irrelevant, and a bust means there's hardly anything in there, and again, the channel's irrelevant, that's fine. But then you end up in a situation like what we have now, as you say, where we're just running that thing at capacity the whole time, and it is causing huge erosion issues. Look, John, I can see you've got some other commitments there. I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Yeah, no worries at all. And thanks for taking an interest in it too, Topher. It's really important that the urban public actually gets a little bit of a feel of what actually is happening out here, because they're the ones that will pay the consequences at the end of the day. Because it's it's all about food at the right prices, clean, green. We do exceptionally well. We're the best rice growers in the world. We're the best at most things that we do. And you take water out of these environments, and you'll end up back to what we had originally, which was dry, arid areas where you run 10 sheep to the acre. And it's not good for the future of Australia.
And I tell you, here's a pro tip for everybody watching. If you want to deal with the cost of living crisis and bring the cost of food down, give our farmers water. It's that simple. John, thank you so much.